Sawadee-kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon and English study group, and we're studying the words of the Buddha. We're in volume 11, which is titled The Realms of Existence. We're going to be exploring chapters 41 through 50 today. So welcome to our class, whether you're joining for the first time or you're joining regularly. Perhaps you're on Facebook, YouTube, or in Zoom, or maybe you're listening or watching this on the replay. So welcome to all of you guys. The way that we do this program is that I share the original words of the Buddha from our book series and invite students who are in Zoom to volunteer to read one of the chapters. And then after a student reads a chapter, I will open up, or I will actually share some teachings on that, helping you guys to understand how to integrate it into your day-to-day life, how to really get the most benefit out of what the Buddha is teaching you. And then I'll open up to any and all questions that you guys have related to that chapter. So if you're in Zoom and you would like to read, all you need to do is electronically raise your hand. I'll be able to see that and you can unmute in order to be able to read. And then when we get to the question period, anybody who's in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, you can ask questions by putting that into the comment section. Or in Zoom, you can raise your hand electronically, unmute your microphone, and ask any questions that way as well. So it looks like Pat is volunteering to read. So go ahead, sir.
Chapter 41, Terrible and Harsh Prison of Hell and Prison of Animal Realm. So, monks, when one does not have confidence in cultivating wholesome qualities, when one does not have a sense of moral wrongdoing in cultivating wholesome qualities, when one does not have moral concern in cultivating wholesome qualities, when one does not have energy in cultivating wholesome qualities, when one does not have wisdom in cultivating wholesome qualities in the Noble One's discipline, one is called a poor, impoverished, needy person. Having no confidence, no sense of moral wrongdoing, no moral concern, no energy, no wisdom in cultivating wholesome qualities, that poor, impoverished, needy person engages in misconduct by body, speech, and mind. This, I say, is his getting into debt. To conceal his bodily misconduct, to conceal his verbal misconduct, to conceal his mental misconduct, he nurtures an evil, unwholesome desire. He wishes, let no one know me. He intends with the desire, let no one know me. He speaks statements with the desire, let no one know me. He makes bodily endeavors with the desire, let no one know me. This, I say, is the interest he must pay. Well-behaved fellow monks speak thus about him. This venerable one acts in such a way, behaves in such a way. This, I say, is his being advised. When he has gone to the forest, to the foot of the tree, or to an empty dwelling, evil, unwholesome thoughts accompanied by remorse attack him. This, I say, is his prosecution. Then, with the breakup of the body, after death, that poor, impoverished, needy person who engaged in misconduct by body, speech, and mind is bound in the prison of hell or the prison of the animal realm. I do not see, monks, any other prison that is as terrible and harsh and such an obstacle to attaining the unsurpassed security from bondage, enlightenment, as the prison of hell or the prison of the animal realm. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pat. So here, this is a discourse that the Buddha is sharing, explaining how when we don't have this confidence in cultivating wholesome qualities and we don't have this moral wrongdoing, what that is where you understand what's wise and unwise in terms of the natural law of karma. What are the wise things that produce wholesome results and what are the unwise things that produce unwholesome results? And when we don't have moral concern, which is concern to not cause harm based on our moral wrongdoing, we would then be wise to cultivate moral concern, that we're disinterested in causing harm. But here the Buddha is talking about someone who doesn't have these things, who doesn't have energy to cultivate wholesome qualities, and who doesn't have wisdom in cultivating wholesome qualities. He's referring to this person as an impoverished and needy person, right? And now he goes on and explains that this individual's body, speech, and mind has misconduct. And now this individual is going into debt. what he's talking about here is that whenever you're making unwise decisions through your moral conduct of body, speech, or mind, you're producing unwholesome karma. And that unwholesome karma needs to be experienced at some point. You can't run and hide from that. Getting to enlightenment, among other things, is to extinguish all your unwholesome karma, getting to the point where you're only experiencing wholesome karma. So if you're producing misconduct by body, speech, or mind, you're going into debt because now you're going to have to experience this unwholesome karma coming back to you. Then the Buddha talks about this individual concealing their bodily misconduct, their verbal misconduct, and their mental misconduct, and that this person nurtures this evil, unwholesome desire because they're not interested in people seeing what it is that they're doing, that they're concealing it, that they're not interested in letting somebody know what it is that they're actually doing. And he's saying this is an individual paying interest. What the Buddha teaches you is that when you're on the path to enlightenment and you're having missteps along the path, that it would be wise to talk to either a senior member of the community or your teacher to be able to expose what it is that you think that has happened that is unwise, so that you can essentially get the feedback that you need and the guidance to be able to overcome that obstacle, because there was some lack of wisdom that the mind had, and that's why it had this misstep. And if we just conceal what it is that we're doing on this path, and you're not giving the opportunity to the mind to cultivate the needed wisdom to overcome that obstacle in the future. So here the Buddha is saying by concealing one's misconduct that you're paying interest, that now you're going to need to actually pay more, because not only did you initially make missteps that produce this debt, but now because you're not cultivating wisdom, you're actually going to produce more misconduct in the future because there's no improved wisdom that's going to lead to improved decisions. So you're going to actually have even more unwholesome karma than initially created because there's no ability to improve that in the future through cultivating the mind and gaining more wisdom. So the Buddha is saying that these well-behaved monks, meaning individuals who are further on the path, that they're advising this individual. They're giving this individual advice to be able to help them. And then he's saying, okay, when this individual that's doing unwholesome things, when they essentially go to seclusion, where here he's talking about being at the foot of a tree in an empty hut or in the forest, that their evil, unwholesome thoughts essentially attack them. They invade the mind. And this is the persecution. So if you've ever laid on your bed quietly and you've been thinking about the things that you've done throughout your day or throughout your week or throughout your life, and you felt remorse about that, that's what the Buddha is talking about. Because at a certain level, when an individual is doing unwise things, we know that those things are unwise to a certain degree, and that's where our thoughts can invade us and attack our mind, and that's where the remorse can come in. And the Buddha is calling this a prosecution. And now he's saying this individual at the breakup of the body, which is death, that this individual is going to be bound to the lower realm of hell or the animal realm. Now remember, the Buddha is never using rebirth in the hell realm or the animal realm or afflicted spirits to guilt, shame, or fear you into doing anything specific. And he's not using the heavenly realm in order to incentivize you to do anything specific. He's just helping you to see true reality of what is truly occurring. That if you have this misconduct of body, speech, and mind, and you allow this to continue where you're not seeking guidance to be able to improve, then having died in that condition where there is no improvement and there's no aspiration to be able to cultivate wholesomeness in the mind, then this individual is going to end up being reborn in the hell realm or the animal realm. And that's where the Buddha is saying that there's no prison that is more terrible or harsh, right? The Buddha describes the hell realm and the animal realm as a prison, because once one's born into the hell realm or the animal realm, it's very challenging to get out of those realms. Now, these realms are all impermanent. It's not like somebody sending you to hell or sending you to heaven, and these are permanent existences. It's your own decisions that are leading to that. That whatever the quality of your mind is at the time of death, that you're going to be reborn in whatever realm, or if you've completely purified your mind, there's not going to be rebirth in any of these realms whatsoever. So if one was reborn into the hell realm or animal realm or afflicted spirits, this is very challenging to get out of those realms. In fact, you guys might be familiar with the discourse where the Buddha talks about how rare it is to get into this human existence, that he talks about the whole world being flooded, and there's this ring that is thrown onto the earth, in the surface of the earth, with the wind blowing this ring all around. There is a blind turtle under the sea that comes up once every 100 years. And he asked his students, what's the likelihood of this turtle coming up once every 100 years? What's the likelihood of it putting its neck into that ring that's being blown all over the surface of the earth? Well, it's very rare. So that's how rare it is to be able to get into this human realm. There's the potential that we have all been in these lower realms at one time or another. Many human beings that are in the human realm have been in the animal realm at one time or another. And now that we're in this human existence, it's the ideal existence to train our mind and get to enlightenment, not allowing this existence to go to waste. So now that we're in this human realm, if we were complacent and we were reborn back into hell or animal realm, it would be lots and lots and lots of lives before we ever get back to the human realm again. So the Buddha, essentially all throughout his teachings, he doesn't necessarily say it here, but all throughout his teachings, he encourages you to focus on developing the mind, starting with the Four Noble Truths and making your way to enlightenment, because that's what's going to ensure that you're creating a better and better life now. The Buddha's not teaching you to have some wonderful afterlife after this. And he's not threatening you with a terrible afterlife after this. Instead, he's guiding you to be able to experience a wonderful life now in this existence, where through training your mind and making wise decisions, you can create the ideal life for yourself. So let me see what questions you guys have here on this particular chapter. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, it looks like Chris might have a question. Go ahead, sir.
Sure. Thanks, David. I think in a previous teaching, you mentioned that in order for a being to reach enlightenment, that they need to experience all of their accumulated unwholesome karma. So I guess karma that would have accumulated in the current life and also the previous life. Could you share more about what's kind of meant about experiencing that karma and the ways to do so?
Sure. So to understand this, it first needs the individual to understand how one is experiencing karma from a previous life. Because it's not like someone, say, murdered someone in a previous life and then just out of the blue, they're going to be murdered in this life. It's not this one for one kind of thing. And it's not this mystical and magical thing. It's not this black cloud that's following you around. So first, let's talk about how one experiences karma from a previous life. And then we'll talk about how it needs to be experienced and actually extinguished. So if we think about our lives as cardboard boxes, where the cardboard box represents the mind, we have cardboard box A, which is the mind. And cardboard box A is a unique cardboard box. It has a certain color, shape, texture, size, and all these different things. It's unique. And now the contents in that cardboard box, if there's contents at the end of this life, when that cardboard box deteriorates, because the mind is impermanent, and when it deteriorates, if there's contents in the mind and if there's contents in this cardboard box, it needs to find a new cardboard box. So now cardboard box B is a completely different size, color, shape, texture, and so forth and so on. And now it has the cravings and residual memories of the previous mind are now in this new mind. It's in this new cardboard box because the contents had to find a new cardboard box. So the way that this might look, if you kind of go to like a story level, an example, let's just say there's an individual named Bob in our previous life who was very sexually promiscuous and having sex with lots of different people. And this individual did this all the way through their entire life. And now they, at the end of that life, they died. And now, of course, they're going to be reborn. And let's just say that because of this rebirth, they were reborn into the human realm. And now being reborn into this human realm, person B, this next person, is now got the cravings and residual memories of this previous being from Bob is now in the mind of this new individual, right? This new individual has the cravings and residual memories from the life of Bob. And now Bob had these, overwhelming sexual cravings. So now this new being has that same craving in the mind. And now this new being is acting upon those cravings. And maybe this individual has had many broken relationships, broken marriages, or maybe they've been divorced several times and they're having lots of sex with different people, being very promiscuous. And now let's just say by the age of 45, this individual contracts a fatal sexually transmitted disease and ends up dying. at the age of 45. Okay, so this individual is experiencing kama from a previous life, that there was a craving from a previous life that were motivating their decisions in their next life. But all the decisions that were being made were in this new life that they had. This individual who ends up dying at 45, let's just say like in their early 20s, they encountered the teachings of the Buddha, and now they actually extinguished their craving, and they never went out and did all this, sexual promiscuity that ultimately led to their death. That would have been ideal, and that would have been very fortunate for that person. But because that person didn't do that, now they're continuing to act upon their craving, their anger, and their ignorance, making decisions on that, and it's leading to their death early in this human life. And now let's just say in that life, they get reborn down into the animal realm. And now in the animal realm, they're experiencing whatever they experience there. So this is how one experiences kama from their previous life, is that their cravings and residual memories are in their new mind, and now they're acting upon that, making decisions upon that. And now in their current life, they're experiencing the results of those decisions. But you can extinguish that by training your mind, by understanding the underlying causes that are motivating this unskillful conduct. Through the teachings of the Buddha, you can actually train your mind and extinguish the craving, anger, and ignorance. And now this individual would have a completely different life than continuing to allow the mind to have this craving, anger, and ignorance, and now producing more and more debt. According to this particular discourse, we can use that word debt, right? That this individual, by continuing to act upon the craving, anger, and ignorance, is getting deeper and deeper into debt because they're producing more and more unwholesome kama. Whereas if they would extinguish their craving, anger, and ignorance, now they're making wise decisions that is going to lead to wholesome results in this life. So any cravings or that are currently in one's mind, you're not necessarily going to know at this time whether it's from this life or a previous life. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, because you need to extinguish all cravings, desires, attachments in the mind. But if you happen to observe your past lives and you can track and you can see that there are certain cravings from your previous lives, then you will know that it is from a previous life. But again, it doesn't even matter at that point too, because you still need to just extinguish it. But that's how an individual is experiencing their kama from their previous life, is that their cravings and residual memories are motivating these unwise decisions, and now they're experiencing their unwholesome kama from their previous life, and they can extinguish it, but they need to choose to do that through understanding what the underlying problem is and then acting upon it to be able to extinguish it through training of the mind. Okay, let me see if we have any other questions anywhere. I don't see any other questions. So let's go to the next chapter, which is chapter 42. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, looks like Keely. Go ahead, ma'am.
Few animals are reborn among human beings and heavenly beings. What do you think, monks? Which is more, a little bit of soil in my fingernail or the great earth? Honorable sir, the great earth is more, a little bit of soil that the perfectly enlightened one has taken up in his fingernail is insignificant. Compared to the great earth, the little bit of soil that the perfectly enlightened one has taken up in his fingernail is not calculable, does not bear comparison, does not amount even to a fraction. So too, monks, those beings are few who, when they pass away from the animal realm, are reborn among human beings. But those beings are more numerous who, when they pass away from the animal realm, are reborn in hell, in the animal realm, in the realm of affinity spirits. For what reason? Because, monks, they have not seen the Four Noble Truths. What for? The noble truth of discontentedness, the noble truth of the cause of discontentedness, the noble truth of the elimination of discontentedness, the noble truth of the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness. Therefore, monks, an effort should be made to understand this is discontentedness. An effort should be made to understand this is the cause of discontentedness. An effort should be made to understand this is the elimination of discontentedness. An effort should be made to understand this is the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness. What do you think, monks? Which is more, the little bit of soil in my fingernail or the great earth? Venerable Sir, the great earth is more, the little bit of soil that the perfectly enlightened one has taken up in his fingernail is insignificant. Compared to the great earth, the little bit of soil that the perfectly enlightened one has taken up in his fingernail is not calculable, does not bear comparison, does not account even a fraction. So too, monks, those beings are few who, when they pass away from the animal realm, are reborn among the heavenly beings. But those beings are more numerous who, when they pass away from the animal realm, are reborn in hell, in the animal realm, in the realm of affiliated spirits. For what reason? Because, monks, they have not seen the Four Noble Truths. What for? The noble truth of discontentedness, the noble truth of the cause of discontentedness, the noble truth of the elimination of discontentedness, the noble truth of the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness. Therefore, monks, an effort should be made to understand this is discontentedness. An effort should be made to understand this is the cause of discontentedness. An effort should be made to understand this is the elimination of discontentedness. An effort should be made to understand this is the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So here, the Buddha is comparing this amount of soil under his finger to all the soil of the entire earth. And he's using it as an analogy to say that the beings who are reborn from the animal realm into the human or heavenly realm are very few. Now, in the animal realm, there's countless beings. There's trillions and trillions of beings, gazillions of beings, right? Because just think about maybe one anthill, right? Or one termite colony or something like this. There's probably 100,000, 200,000 insects just in that one ant hill or that one termite colony, right? So now you multiply that through the numbers of those all throughout the world, and it's quite significant. And scientists tell us that the number of animals that we see that exist in the world is only 1% of what once did exist, that we're only seeing 1%, that 99% of the animals that once existed either no longer exist or have gone extinct. So there's just tons and tons and tons of animals that are in the animal world. They're looking to be reborn, of course. At some point, it would be wonderful for them to make their way into the human realm so that they can then have an opportunity to get to enlightenment or the heavenly realm. So it's very rare for an individual to come into this human realm from those particular realms, but it's happening all the time. It's just that there's so many animals that are dying and constantly dying that beings coming into the human realm, while I've shared with you just in the last discourse that the vast majority of us have come out of the animal realm, that's still a very small fraction of the animals that are actually there, right? So the Buddha is helping you to be able to see this, that it's very rare for an individual to be reborn into the human realm. Now, here he's saying the reason why is because they're not understanding the Four Noble Truths, that they haven't understood these, because that's where you can have the real breakthrough to understanding what is the problem in your mind, the cause of that problem, the elimination of it, and the path forward. And for anybody who's been studying here with me for any period of time, you know what those Four Noble Truths are, and I've taught them many times in our foundational classes. But if you need help with those, at any point, you're always welcome to let me know. But that's usually something that you're learning at the very beginning of your journey to enlightenment. So let me know what questions you guys have here, where the Buddha is just talking about how rare it is for animals to be reborn into the human realm or into the heavenly realm. Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere. So I'm going to move on to the next one. Now we're moving into the section on afflicted spirits. We're not going to read this one. This is chapter 43. This is where the Buddha is just going through and describing the afflicted spirits. He talks about many different types of afflicted spirits here. And you can read this on your own because the book series is available to you. You can download it from our website for free. You can take it and go print it. You can get printed versions on Amazon, or you can get them at our temple here in Chiang Mai by just reimbursing us for the printing cost. So here you can see this is very long, where it's describing all these different types of afflicted spirits. And you guys know, if you have any questions on these, that if you have read it, you're more than welcome to ask me. But otherwise, I'm just going to be moving through this so that we can move to the next chapter. So it looks like Samantha might have a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Teacher David. I did read all of these ahead of time, and it seems like the majority of these are what I would consider human form. There were just a couple at the beginning that were not. So is there a reason for that?
Oftentimes when beings are moving into the afflicted spirit realm, if they're coming out of the human realm, they're going to kind of take on a presence of that existence. So in the afflicted spirit realm, if you were previously a human and you're reborn into the afflicted spirit realm, you're going to take on a kind of almost a presence of as if you were human. This is where people see apparitions that look very human. But also if you were, like, say, in the animal realm and then you moved into the afflicted spirit realm, you're going to take on the presence of like an animal. So that even though you're formless, there is kind of like an apparition that some people can see. And that's what people are going to experience. So the Buddha here might be focusing more on describing those particular beings coming out of the human realm versus some of the other realms that can end up in the afflicted spirit realm.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. I just recently got a new computer, so my spell checker here hasn't learned all the words that I normally have the spell checker program to know. All right, so we'll move to this next one, which is chapter 43, or actually 44. This one we're also not going to read because it's essentially the same thing as the one we just read, where the one we just read was talking about how rare it is for animals to be reborn into the human and heavenly realm. This one's essentially the same thing, but talking about afflicted spirits. It's saying how rare it is for an afflicted spirit to be reborn into the human realm or the heavenly realm. And it's because of not having seen the Four Noble Truths. So by studying the previous one, you've essentially studied this one as well. So it's the same exact thing. All right, so now we can move into the section of human beings, where now we can study the chapter 45, which is the 10 courses of wholesome karma. Is there someone who would like to read this one? Okay, Samantha, go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you. 10 courses of wholesome Dhamma. Purity by body, Kunda, is threefold. Purity by speech is fourfold. Purity by mind is threefold. And how, Kunda, is purity by body threefold? 1. Here, someone having abandoned the destruction of life abstains from the destruction of life. With the rod and weapon laid aside, diligent and kindly, he resides compassionate towards all beings. 2. Having abandoned the taking of what is not given, he abstains from taking what is not given. He does not steal the wealth and property of others in the village or in the forest. 3. Having abandoned sexual misconduct, he abstains from sexual misconduct. He does not have sexual relations with women who are protected by their mother and father, brother, sister, or relatives, who are protected by their teachings, who have a husband, whose violation entails a penalty, or even with one already engaged. It is in this way that purity by body is threefold. And how, Kunda, is purity by speech fourfold? 1. Here someone is having abandoned false speech, abstains from false speech. If he is summoned to a council, to an assembly, to his relative's presence, to his club, or to the court, and questioned as a witness thus, "So, good man, tell what you know then," not knowing, he says, "I do not know." Or knowing, he says, "I know." Not seeing, he says, "I do not see." Sorry about that. Or seeing, he says, "I see." Thus, he does not knowingly speak falsehood for his own benefit, or for another's benefit, or for some insignificant worldly benefit. 2. Having abandoned argumentative speech, he abstains from argumentative speech. Having heard something here, he does not repeat it elsewhere in order to divide those people from these, or having heard something elsewhere, he does not repeat it to these people in order to divide them from those. Thus he is one who reunites those who are divided, a promoter of unity, who enjoys calmness, rejoices in calmness, encourages calmness, a speaker of words that promote calmness. 3, having abandoned harsh speech, he abstains from harsh speech. He speaks such words as are gentle, pleasing to the ear, and lovable, as go to the heart, are courteous, desired by many, and agreeable to many. 4, having abandoned idle chatter, he abstains from idle chatter. He speaks at a proper time, speaks truth, speaks what is beneficial, speaks on the teachings and the discipline. At a proper time, he speaks such words as are worth recording, reasonable, concise, and beneficial. It is in this way that purity by speech is fourfold. And how Kunda is purity by mind threefold. 1, here, someone is without longing or craving. He does not long for the wealth and property of others thus. Oh, may what belongs to another be mine. 2, he is of goodwill, loving kindness, and his intentions are free of hate thus. May these beings live peacefully, free from hostility, harm, and anxiety. 3, he holds right view and has correct perspective thus. There is what is given, sacrificed, and offered. There is fruit and result of wholesome and unwholesome actions. There is this world and the other world. There is mother and father. There are beings spontaneously reborn. There are in the world ascetics and Brahmins of right conduct and right practice who, having realized this world and the other world for themselves by direct knowledge, make them known to others. It is in this way that purity by mind is threefold. These kunda are the 10 courses of wholesome Dhamma. It is because people engage in these 10 courses of wholesome Dhamma that the heavenly beings, human beings, and other good destinations are seen. Monks, one possessing these 10 qualities, is deposited in heaven as if brought there.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So we can connect this to the question that Chris had just asked previously, because what you're doing on the path to enlightenment is you're working to extinguish all your unwholesome karma. And the way that you're accomplishing this is by producing wholesome karma. You're cultivating wisdom about the path to enlightenment. You're training your mind with meditation. You're doing all these different things that the Buddha is teaching you as part of the path to enlightenment. And ultimately what you're doing is you're bringing down the pollutions of your mind and you're increasing the wholesome qualities in your mind, which are motivating more and more wholesome decisions that are going to produce wholesome results or wholesome karma. But oftentimes we lack wisdom of what is wise or unwise, what is wholesome or unwholesome. So the Buddha is helping you to be able to see that in a way that you can independently verify. And this is a particular discourse where he's focusing on developing the wholesome qualities that are going to lead to wholesome results. Because with pollutions of mind, your mind will have a tendency to be interested in doing just the opposite of what's wholesome. And here he's talking about how to develop wholesome karma through body, speech, and mind. And he's focusing on just some of the key aspects of this. There's other aspects as well, but these are just some of the really important big pieces where if you were killing, stealing, or having sexual misconduct, which he goes into a lot more detail of this in the 5 precepts. If you study his original words on the 5 precepts, you'll be able to see what he talks about there because it provides much more illuminating language than what most people are studying. Most people have heard the Buddha taught no killing, no stealing, no sexual misconduct, no lying, no intoxicants, and this isn't what the Buddha actually taught. This sounds like black and white or rules and commandment. He gives much more illuminating language than that. And what he's doing is he's guiding you to eliminate craving, anger, and ignorance, because these are the 3 unwholesome roots. And whenever you're making decisions through those, it's going to produce unwholesome results. So here, in order to produce wholesome results in terms of your body, speech, and mind, he's explaining first to eliminate this interest in destroying life, that you no longer have this desire and this longing, yearning, this craving to go out and kill other beings, because that's going to knock down your craving, and your mind needs to be able to do that. And you need to knock down that anger, and you need to knock down the ignorance or the unknowing and true reality, and realize by killing other beings, whenever you put out harm, harm is going to come back to you. And the same thing with stealing, that if you're stealing, there's a certain amount of craving in the mind. where the mind's longing, yearning for this particular thing, and it's not willing to work itself to be able to acquire that. And then you have to have a certain amount of ill will towards this being who you're stealing from, because now they're not going to be able to use that thing, whatever it is that we take from them. And then that mind has a certain amount of ignorance or unknowing of true reality or lack of wisdom, that it doesn't realize that it's causing harm. And now you're going to need to experience this harm coming back to you. But when you abandon that, that's going to actually help you produce wholesome results. And then the same thing with sexual misconduct. Abandoning that eliminates a certain amount of craving, anger, and ignorance. And you would need to see the 5 precepts to really study this in detail and see how to actually apply it. And that's why I teach that in all the foundational programs. And then the same thing with speech, that if you eliminate false speech, argumentative speech, harsh speech, and idle chatter, this is also going to help you eliminate a certain amount of craving, anger, and ignorance. That you can independently verify what the Buddha is teaching you here, that whenever you lie, it causes unwholesome results. Whenever you have argumentative speech, it's going to produce unwholesome results for you. When you have harsh speech, meaning your tone, your tempo, or your word choice is unwise, that's going to produce unwholesome results for you. You've seen that in your own life. And then when you have idle chatter, or if you've ever been around someone who's had idle chatter, where there's no real purpose behind them speaking. It's just kind of random, blah, 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 just kind of like almost like a broadcast. It's not really a conversation. Someone's just talking with an underlying craving. So when there's this craving, anger, and ignorance in the mind, then it's going to lead to unwise speech, not only unwise bodily conduct, but unwise speech as well. So the Buddha is teaching you to eliminate that so that then you can produce wholesome results. That's the way you extinguish your unwholesome karma, is by producing only wholesome karma more and more and more through training of your mind. But this moral conduct that the Buddha teaches by body and speech, you wouldn't actually be able to easily implement it if you didn't understand the moral conduct of the teachings of the Buddha. Because, plenty of people have taught moral conduct over the years, and all throughout human history, we see moral conduct being taught. But one of the unique things about the Buddhist teachings is he's helping you understand the thing that motivates unwise moral conduct, which is the pollution in the mind. And now he's giving you the tools and the techniques through the mental discipline to bring down that pollution, so that now with the wisdom of what would be wise, you can implement that. Where oftentimes growing up, we learn certain moral conduct, but we don't really implement it. And it's very challenging for us because the mind is so polluted. So it's one thing to kind of sit here in a class and talk about being loving and kind and warm and gentle, but it's a whole other thing going out into the world and actually doing it. And that's where you need to have the whole entire Eightfold Path to be able to support you in training your mind and bringing down the pollution, so that then as you're gaining the wisdom on the moral conduct, you can go out into the world and actually practice that good, wholesome moral conduct. So here, the purity by mind that the Buddha is talking about is eliminating craving, which is that longing, yearning, the chasing after the objects of your affection, eliminating the anger, hatred, and ill will, and all those lesser versions like frustration, agitation, and annoyance. Because by the time you get to enlightenment, you don't even have the slightest dislike towards another being. You can love and have goodwill towards all beings in the world. And the Buddha is talking about cultivating wisdom. And he talks about this sometimes through right view, is holding this perspective of understanding what is really truly going on in your own mind and in the world itself. That you understand the natural law of karma, that you understand your mind, you understand these things through having learned and investigated and examined teachings, through reflecting on them to independently verify them, and through practicing them. So by purifying your mind of craving, anger, and ignorance, that's what's actually going to help you to implement the moral conduct that is then going to produce wholesome results. Because when your mind is polluted and you're out there being unskillful through your intentions, your speech, and your actions, you're connecting it back to the previous discourse, is you're going into debt, that you're producing this unwholesome karma. So yelling and hollering at your mom or your dad or your brothers or sisters or friends or neighbors or being argumentative with people, that's not solving anything. But the unenlightened mind, because its lack of wisdom of the Four Noble Truths, it firmly believes that those painful feelings you're experiencing is coming from other people. So it will be bitter and harsh and hostile through your intention, speech, and actions towards others. And now that unskillfulness is producing unwholesome karma that you're going to need to experience, because if you're putting it out, it's going to come back to you. Your family, friends, neighbors, they're going to treat you similarly to the way that you treat them. So the way that you improve your relationships, the way you improve your life, is you first work on your own mind, eliminating craving, anger, and ignorance, but in more detail, the 10 fetters. And then at the same time, you're working to improve your moral conduct so that your day-to-day interactions can be wise, which will produce wholesome results for you. And the Buddha is explaining how by purifying the mind and practicing these 10 courses of wholesome Dhamma, this is what's going to lead to improvement in your day-to-day life. He teaches that all throughout his teachings. But here, what he's talking about is he's talking about how it leads to rebirth in the heavenly realm. And the reason why is because that if you're on your way to enlightenment, the same things that lead to enlightenment, if you fall short of that for any reason, it has the tendency to have you be reborn in the heavenly realm as well. But remember that heavenly existence is not permanent. Those beings experience exclusively pleasant feelings. They tend to be fairly complacent. They don't practice the teachings very closely in order to be able to train the mind to get to enlightenment. So you need to understand that the goal of this path is not to be reborn in heaven, and that is not a permanent existence. But the reason why the Buddha is teaching this aspect of this 10 courses of wholesome karma is that, of course, you would like to get to enlightenment in this life because then you're experiencing peace and joy. You're living the ideal life. But if for some reason you fall short of that, the Buddha is helping you to be able to see that, yes, the same things that lead to enlightenment are the same things that can lead to rebirth in the heavenly realm as well. So let me know what questions you guys have here. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So it looks like Samantha has a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you. Just looking back at the previous chapter, there's a sentence in there that says, under your explanations, that the afflicted spirits have no opportunity to learn and reflect on the teachings, which sounds very similar to the hell and the animal realms. So I'm just wondering, like reading those descriptions of the afflicted spirits, it sounds very similar to hell. The hell realm. So what is the differentiation or I guess why there are two different realms? They seem very similar in that you're basically, living through horrible things and not experiencing anything other than painful feelings.
Sure. The difference is that the lifespan in the hell realm is an exorbitant amount longer than in the afflicted spirit realm. And in the hell realm, they're only experiencing painful feelings. Where in the afflicted spirit realm, they're experiencing the neither painful nor pleasant and the painful feelings as well. So there's a bit of a difference that way in terms of the lifespan and what types of feelings you're experiencing.
Okay, but they would not experience any pleasant feelings.
No, they don't.
Afflicted spirits. Okay.
That's right.
Thank you.
They don't. Yep. Great question. Okay, let me see if we have any other questions. I'm going to just look at Facebook and YouTube. I don't see anything. So let's go to the next chapter. This is chapter 46. It looks like Pat's volunteering for that one. Go ahead, sir.
5 advantages to one of wholesome morality and of success in morality. And householders, there are these 5 advantages to one of wholesome morality and of success in morality. What are they? In the first place, through careful attention to his affairs, he gains much wealth. In the second place, he gets a wholesome reputation for morality and wholesome conduct. In the third place, whatever assembly he approaches, whether of Katayas, Brahmins, householders, or ascetics, he does so with confidence and assurance. In the fourth place, he dies unconfused. In the fifth place, after death, at the breaking up of the body, he rises in a good place, a heavenly world. These are the 5 advantages to one of wholesome morality and its success in morality.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. So here, the Buddha is just helping you see the cause and effect of practicing wholesome moral conduct. Ultimately, the advantage here in this present life is getting to enlightenment, right? That you're able to make your way to enlightenment, you're able to purify your mind, you're able to experience wholesome results coming back to you. And here's what the Buddha is talking about as additional benefits to be able to help you see that by practicing this moral conduct, not only are you making your way to enlightenment, reducing and eliminating the pollution out of your mind and producing harmonious relationships. But these are 5 things that he's sharing that is experienced by someone who has wholesome moral conduct. And you would need to first cultivate the wisdom of what that is to be able to practice it. And you need to work on reducing and eliminating your pollution so that you can practice it. So he's saying the first one is that through careful attention to his affairs, he gains much wealth. So someone who essentially is having wholesome moral conduct, more and more people are interested in doing business with you. If you were lying, if you were stealing, if you were doing backhanded deals and corruption, people aren't going to be interested in doing work with you, right? So in order to become wealthy, you can't do that by yourself. You're going to need other people to be able to acquire wealth. And not that acquiring wealth is a particular goal that the Buddha is guiding you to be able to obtain, but instead, he's just helping you to be able to see that this is what will occur, that if you're paying careful attention to your affairs and you're having this good, wholesome moral conduct and you're being diligent in your work, that it's going to lead to an increased amount of wealth. The second one, he's talking about having this wholesome reputation for morality and wholesome conduct. And this reputation is going to help you in your personal and your professional relationships. Then he says, whatever assembly he approaches, whether Khattiyas, Brahmins, householders, or ascetics, he does so with confidence and assurance. What he's talking about here is that these individual populations of people during the lifetime of the Buddha were known to have good, wholesome moral conduct. Khattiyas were kind of held up by the Buddha as like a society of people who were closely practicing his teachings without him even necessarily teaching them, because these are the natural laws. And people can understand those and cultivate that wisdom within a population of people without necessarily being exposed to the Buddhist teachings. So these Khattiyas were known during the lifetime of the Buddha to be practicing very good, wholesome moral conduct. And then the Brahmins were practicing a certain amount of wholesome moral conduct to a certain degree. Household practitioners, which are people who are studying his teachings from the household life. And then ascetics, people who are on the path to enlightenment and learning and growing and developing on the path. These are individuals who are into wholesome things. Well, if you are also doing wholesome things and you know that what you're doing is wise and wholesome, when you approach people who are also doing wholesome things, you can do so with confidence and assurance. Whereas if you were doing unwise and unwholesome and backhanded things, when you approach people who you know are into wholesome things, you're going to lack confidence. Right? You're not going to be able to look those people in the eye. You're going to have difficulties and struggles approaching those kinds of individuals. Your mind will kind of almost implode on itself potentially, where you feel like less of a person approaching these kinds of people that are into wholesome things, knowing in your own mind that you're doing unwise and unwholesome things. So by doing the work to acquire good, wholesome moral conduct, when you approach people that are into wholesomeness, you can do so with confidence, whether it's your boss, whether it's monks or ordained practitioners, whether it's teachers, whether it's people who are doing any kind of wholesome things, you can do so with confidence. Then the fourth one, the Buddha says that this individual dies unconfused. Because if you're cultivating wholesome moral conduct, that means you're cultivating wisdom about the natural law of Gama. That's what's going to lead to you developing the wisdom of good, wholesome moral conduct. And if you're developing wisdom of the natural law of Gama, then you understand the cause and effect. And your mind is awakening to the wisdom of this natural law. But if you weren't developing your wholesome moral conduct, you're just kind of plowing through life and not really paying attention to what would be wise or unwise, that means the mind is pretty unwise of the natural law of Gama. And being unwise to these natural laws is to be confused or have misunderstanding or a lack of wisdom. So now as an individual dies, if they are doing wholesome things, they would be unconfused because they actually understand the cause and effect and what's actually going to happen next as a result of them practicing good, wholesome moral conduct. They know what is going to happen next. They don't have to be fearful and scared of this. And then in the fifth place, what the Buddha is going to ultimately talk about when he's talking about these kinds of things is that whenever you're practicing this good, wholesome moral conduct, if you fall short of enlightenment for any reason, there's this potential to be reborn in the heavenly world. So these are the 5 things that the Buddha is talking about as advantages of practicing good, wholesome moral conduct. So let me know if you have any questions here on this particular chapter. Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere. So I'm going to move on to the next chapter. Here you can see words from me explaining each one of these that you guys can read if you like. It'll really help to fully inform you of what the Buddha is actually teaching. This is chapter 47. Is there someone who would like to read it? Okay, looks like Keely's going to take another one. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you. One is reborn through one's deeds. Monks, beings are the owners of their karma, the heirs of their karma. They have karma as their origin, karma as their relative, karma as their resort. Whatever karma they do, wholesome or unwholesome, they are its heirs. Here, having abandoned the destruction of life, someone abstained from the destruction of life, with the rod and weapon laid aside, dedicated unkindly. He resides compassionate toward all living beings. He does not creep along by body, speech, and mind. His bodily karma is straight. His verbal karma is straight. His mental karma is straight. His destination is straight. His rebirth is straight. But for one with a straight destination and rebirth, I say there is one of two destinations, either the exclusively pleasant heavens or influential families, such as those of affluent Kshatriyas, affluent Brahmins, or affluent householders, families that are rich with great wealth and property, abundant gold and silver, abundant treasures and belongings, abundant wealth and grain. Thus a being is reborn from a being. One is reborn through one's deeds. When one has been reborn, contacts affect one. It is in this way I say that beings are the heirs of their karma. The Tathagata spoke of abandoning of taking what is not given and abandoning of sensual misconduct, with discourses similar to that of abandoning taking life. He also spoke of the fourfold wholesome conduct of speech and the threefold wholesome conduct of mind in the same way. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Keely. So here, the Buddha is helping you to be able to see that your rebirth is based on your decisions, right? Oftentimes people are taught that it's some being or some force that is overlooking your life and judging every single aspect of what you did during your life and sending you to a good place or bad place. And this just isn't actually true. It's your own decisions that are leading to any particular result. And it's the status and the condition of your mind at the time of death that's going to determine your rebirth. So if you've been working on your mind and reducing or eliminating your pollution of mind, then when you get to the point of death, if there's less pollution in your mind, you're going to have an improved rebirth. Where if there's no pollution in your mind, the mind's actually enlightened and there's not going to be rebirth and the cycle of rebirth at all. So it's our own decisions that are leading to any particular result. This natural law of karma, it isn't mystical or magical. It's not anything about punishments or rewards or who's to blame or who's at fault. It's just the results of your decisions. When you make decisions wisely or unwisely, it's going to produce either wholesome or unwholesome results. And only you can produce karma for yourself. Nobody else can do that. Sometimes you hear people joking around. They're like, oh, don't rub your bad karma off on me. Or, hey, I'm going to give you some of my good karma. This isn't actually possible. That it's your own decisions that are leading to any particular result. And the Buddha is explaining that having abandoned these types of things that would lead to unwholesome results because the mind would have craving, desire, attachment in there, that this individual doesn't creep along by body, speech, and mind. What he means by creeping is that you're hiding the things that you do, that you're disinterested in other people knowing the things that you're doing. Because if you're doing things that are wise, you would be pleased to be able to share these things, right? Like say somebody's going to be gossiping or slandering on Facebook. Maybe they'll open up a fake account and they'll post under a fake name, and now they'll be gossiping and slandering about somebody. Well, that's because they know that what they're doing is unwise and they're creeping along. They're trying to hide what they do. But you can't hide from your natural law of karma. This natural law of karma is going to be affecting you one way or the other. You can't hide from those unwholesome results that you're producing based on the unwise decisions. So the Buddha is talking about someone who's making wise decisions, that if they're making wise decisions, that their karma is straight. In other words, that it's wholesome. And because of this, the individual is going to experience this straight rebirth. And what he means by a straight rebirth is that if you're in the human realm and you're reborn back into the human realm, this is a straight rebirth. Or if you're reborn into an improved existence within this particular life, like here he's talking about affluent Khatyas, affluent Brahmins, affluent householders. These are all individuals that are well known within the lifetime of the Buddha as being affluent or having a fairly decent life. And now if one's being reborn into that situation, this is a straight rebirth because an individual has practiced to a certain degree that they've reduced a certain amount of pollution in their mind, and now they'll experience this improved rebirth. So the Buddha is helping you to be able to see this through the deeds that you perform. Because while some people think of like the natural law of karma as rules and commandments, and like if you do this, this is going to happen, and you're going to do this, and this is going to happen, it's actually not that. Right? It's that when you have a certain pollution of mind, you're going to make unwise decisions. And when you lack pollution of mind, you're going to make certain decisions that are wise and are producing wholesome results. So the Buddha is showing you moral conduct, and he's talking about moral conduct, but this all comes back to the condition of your mind. It's not just the fact that you've chosen to kill. It's that in order to kill or steal or have sexual misconduct or lie or take substances that cause heedlessness, there needs to be a certain amount of pollution in the mind of craving, anger, and ignorance to be able to do that. And now with having improved that moral conduct, that means you've improved the mind. It always comes back to the mind. It's not that someone's overseeing you and looking and judging your conduct over the course of your life and determining what happens to you. It's that you are determining the level of pollution in your mind. And when you get to the time of death, whatever that level of pollution is, that's going to determine whether or not you are reborn. And if you are reborn, it's going to determine in what situation you're going to be reborn. So let me know what questions you guys have here. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or in Zoom. Okay, it looks like we have a question here from Tonka on YouTube. Due to impermanence, we will still experience some misfortune even when there is no pollution in the mind, right? Well, to me, misfortune is like discontentedness is really unfortunate. When you have discontentedness, these kinds of things, those are the kinds of things that you won't experience as an enlightened being. But you will still experience sickness, aging, death, loss, and destruction. These are the unobtainables. Whether you consider that to be unfortunate or not is up to you, but I understand that that's just part of life because yes, that is due to impermanence. You are going to experience those things. But as an enlightened being, your mind won't be frustrated or agitated or annoyed or the slightest little bit of discontentedness when you're experiencing sickness, aging, death, loss, or destruction. You could actually have somebody steal a couple $1,000s from you as an enlightened being or however much money, and you would not be upset by that. And of course, it doesn't mean that you're just going to be like, oh, well, and walk away from it. You might still go report it. You might still try to acquire that money back, but you're going to do so in a calm way, in a respectful way. You're going to do it in a way that is wise, right? So even though you'll experience sickness, aging, death, loss, and destruction, you won't be discontent about that. And I don't consider those things to necessarily be unfortunate. I just understand that it's part of the natural laws that because of the universal truth of impermanence, you can escape those things. But the difference is you can escape the discontentedness that people will typically experience during those periods of time because of their cravings. You can escape that. And that is very fortunate. So that's why I don't consider those things to be unfortunate necessarily. Now, if somebody was unenlightened and they experienced a death due to their unwholesome karma, I might say, oh, that's so unfortunate, right? Because of that situation. But by the time you get to enlightenment, there's nothing unfortunate happening to you. The way that I see it is that these are just things that are occurring naturally because of the natural laws. And now something very fortunate has occurred and that your mind is completely peaceful and joyful despite those things occurring due to the natural law of karma. Okay, I don't see any other questions anywhere. So we'll go on to the next one. This is chapter 48. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, it looks like Samantha. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you. 3 surpassing respects of Jambudipa people. Monks, in 3 respects, the people of Uttarakuru surpass the heavenly beings and the people of Jambudipa. What 3? 1, they are without selfishness and possessiveness. 2, their lifespan is fixed. 3, their living conditions are exceptional. In these 3 respects, the people of Uttarakuru surpass the heavenly beings and the people of Jambudipa. In 3 respects, the people of Jambudipa surpass the people of Uttarakuru and the heavenly beings. What 3? They are heroes, they are mindful, and there is the living of the spiritual life here. In these 3 respects, the people of Jambudipa surpass the people of Uttarakuru and the heavenly beings.
Okay, thank you, Samantha. So here, I've added in here what you can understand what the Buddha is talking about here is that this is how they refer to the continents, where we refer to them as North America, South America, so forth and so on. They were aware, I think, of about 4 continents at the time of the life of the Buddha 2,500 years ago. So they refer to a continent in this way. So the Buddha is basically talking about a large population of people when he's talking about this. So he's basically talking about this group of people that are in the human realm that are surpassing the heavenly beings. Because as I've shared with you, is being in the human realm is actually ideal. It's actually better than being in the heavenly realm because you tend to have built-in motivation to be able to get to enlightenment, where beings in the heavenly realm tend to not have that. They tend to be complacent because they experience exclusively pleasant feelings. So here the Buddha is explaining how these human beings of this certain population surpass heavenly beings. And he says they're without selfishness and possessiveness, that their lifespan is fixed, and that their living conditions are exceptional. So this would be better than what is being experienced in the heavenly realm. But then he's saying that population of people, there's a population of people that are actually experiencing something even better than that. And now he refers to these individuals down here. He's saying that there's certain people that are heroes, that are mindful, meaning they have awareness of mind, and they're living the spiritual life, meaning they're actually practicing the teachings that lead to enlightenment. And that's what the Buddha is always prioritizing in each one of his discourses where he might talk about these kinds of things. He prioritizes the development of the mind to get to enlightenment. Because after all, if you're just here to eat some things, to go visit some tourist sites, to buy some material possessions like jewelry or shoes or clothes, or to go out and party and do these kinds of things, so what? Right? If you're not actually training your mind to get to enlightenment and experiencing the peace and the joy that is the enlightened mental state, nothing else really matters. It doesn't matter how great of a job you have. It doesn't matter how big of a paycheck you have. It doesn't matter how big of a house you stay in. If you're not actually training your mind to get to this peaceful and joyful mental state that is enlightenment, it doesn't even matter. So the Buddha is always prioritizing the development of the mind. And these individuals that he's talking about 2 aspects of the mind. 1, mindfulness, which is awareness of mind, because you need that in order to get to enlightenment. You need to be aware of what are the wholesome qualities and unwholesome qualities within your own mind so that you can support and encourage the wholesome qualities and you can eliminate the unwholesome qualities out of the mind. And that these individuals are living the spiritual life, meaning that they're learning and growing and developing on the path to enlightenment, and they're implementing the teachings on a day-to-day basis to train their mind. And he's saying this is superior to these other populations, which includes the heavenly beings, right? So you guys have heard me multiple times share how an existence in the human realm is more superior than that of a heavenly being. Not that we are superior. It's not that there's a pecking order of beings, but it's just that in terms of where would you be interested to be in order to be able to make your way to this enlightened mental state? The human realm is a much better place to do that because we tend to have built-in motivation. We have pleasant feelings, painful feelings, and neither painful nor pleasant. And we don't like those painful feelings in the unenlightened state. And we don't like those neither painful nor pleasant feelings either. We don't like the anger and the sadness and the frustration and the guilt and the shame and all those other feelings. And that tends to be built-in motivation for us to make our way to enlightenment. Where if you were just experiencing exclusively pleasant feelings, there isn't really any motivation to make your way to enlightenment, because what you're experiencing is pretty nice. You're experiencing all this happiness and excitement and elation and thrill and euphoria. So if you weren't experiencing those painful feelings, you might not have that built-in motivation. So in times where you're angry and frustrated, or maybe you're thinking back to your childhood about some of the traumatic things that happened, in some respects, you can be thankful for those things, because that's what's motivating you potentially to be on this path. I know it did for me, that all those things that I experienced in the past and the misery and the despair that I was experiencing is what motivated me to walk towards something that was better. So in times of painful feelings, sure, you need to cut those off and let it go and get rid of it out of the mind and train the mind to be peaceful and joyful. But at the same time, you can be thankful for those experiences, because that's what's actually motivating you to continue to do the work that you need to do within the mind to actually get to enlightenment. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or in Zoom. Okay, it looks like Terrence has a question. If heavenly beings are complacent and perhaps not motivated to progress, might they be reborn in the lower state? Yes, a heavenly being can be reborn down into hell, down into the animal realm, afflicted spirits, or even in the human realm too. You'll see this when we get to the point of this book where we're studying about the heavenly beings. The Buddha talks about this, how beings can go down to the lower realms. And you can also see, if you studied the previous chapters, how beings in the hell realm can actually go up to the heavenly realm too. It's not like there's just one door, and it's not like there's this serial direction, this linear progression from hell, animal, afflicted spirit, human, and heavenly realm. These beings are actually being reborn in and out of all these different realms. It's rare for a being to go from heaven all the way down to hell, but it can happen. And it's very rare for a being to go from hell all the way up to heaven, but it can happen. So the Buddha teaches you about all of that through his discourses. So yeah, it's possible for a heavenly being to be reborn into the lower realms. Looks like Chris has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Sure. So from what I hear, heavenly beings do have some selfishness. They do have some possessiveness. They are not as heroic as the group, as the content of people that were living on Earth at the time, and their living conditions in the heavenly realm are not as exceptional as that other group that was living at the time on Earth.
Exactly. That's how you can take a discourse like this and you can extrapolate additional learning beyond just what the Buddha's telling you, right? Because he's going to share certain things with you, but then there's things you can extrapolate too, to be able to see another side of that. And that's exactly the way you would use a discourse like this, to be able to gain some insight on another realm like the heavenly realm.
Yeah. But wouldn't something like selfishness and possessiveness have unpleasant qualities associated with them as well, or unpleasant feelings?
In the heavenly realm, it doesn't produce that. They only experience exclusively pleasant feelings. But here in the human realm, when there's selfishness and possessiveness, that's craving, desire, attachment that's going to ultimately lead to painful feelings, or feelings that are neither painful nor pleasant. But the selfishness and possessiveness in the heavenly realm, they only get the pleasant feelings as a result, because their mind is essentially getting what they want.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I don't see any other questions anywhere. So let's move to the next chapter, which is chapter 49. Is there someone who would like to read this one? Chris, you still have your hand up. Would you like to read this one? Oh, you put it down.
Yeah, I could read it.
Okay, go for it.
Birth is the origin of discontentedness, the union of three things. Monks, the conception of an embryo in a womb takes place through the union of three things. Here, there is the union of the mother and father, but it is not the mother's season, and the consciousness/mind to be reborn is not present. In this case, there is no conception of an embryo in a womb. Here, there is union of the mother and father, and it is the mother's season, but the consciousness/mind to be reborn is not present. In this case, there is no conception of an embryo in a womb. But when there is the union of the mother and father, and it is in the mother's season, and the consciousness/mind to be reborn is present, through the union of these three things, the conception of an embryo in the womb takes place. The mother then carries the embryo in her womb for 9 or 10 months with much anxiety as a heavy burden. Then at the end of 9 or 10 months, the mother gives birth with much anxiety as a heavy burden. Then when the child is born, she nourishes it with her own blood. For the mother's breast milk is called blood in the noble one's discipline. When he grows up and his sense base is mature, the child plays as such games as toy plows, tip cat, somersaults, toy windmills, toy measures, toy carts, and a toy bow and arrow. When he grows up and his sense base is mature still further, the youth enjoys himself provided and endowed with the 5 chords of sensual pleasure, with forms recognizable by the eye, sounds recognizable by the ear, odors recognizable by the nose, flavors recognizable by the tongue, physical objects recognizable by the body, and that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and likable, connected with sensual desire and provocation of craving. On seeing a form with the eye, he craves after it as if it is pleasing. He dislikes it if it is unpleasing. He resides with mindfulness of the body unestablished, with a limited mind, and he does not understand it as it is actually the liberation of mind and liberation of wisdom, wherein those evil, unwholesome states cease without remainder. Engaged as he is in favoring and imposing, whatever feeling he feels, whether pleasant or painful, or neither painful nor pleasant, he delights in that feeling, welcomes it, and remains holding to it. And as he does so, excitement arises in him. Now, excitement in feelings is clinging. With his clinging as condition, existence comes to be. With existence as condition, birth. With birth as condition, aging and death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair come to be. Such is the origin of this whole mass of discontentedness. On hearing a sound with the ear, on smelling an odor with the nose, on tasting a flavor with the tongue, on touching a physical object with the body, on recognizing a mental object with the mind, he craves after it if it is pleasing, he dislikes it if it is unpleasing. He resides with mindfulness of the body unestablished, with a limited mind, and he does not understand as it actually is the liberation of mind and liberation by wisdom, wherein those evil, unwholesome states are eliminated without remainder. Engaged as he is in favoring and opposing, whatever feeling he feels, whether pleasant or painful, or neither painful nor pleasant, he delights in that feeling, welcomes it, and remains holding to it. As he does so, excitement arises in him. Now, excitement in feelings is clinging. Now, with clinging as condition, existence comes to be. The existence as condition, birth. With birth as condition, aging and death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair comes to be. Such is the origin of this whole mass of discontentedness.
All right. Thank you, Chris. So here, what the Buddha is doing is he's taking essentially dependent origination, which you guys have maybe studied with me in the past through this program, where there's these 12 interlinking steps, which teaches you how beings come in and out of this world. It's helping you to understand the cycle of rebirth in a way that you can independently verify. He's taking that and he's putting a bit of a story to it so you can see how this whole process works. And he's starting all the way back at essentially the parents choosing to come together and have sexual intercourse to be able to potentially have a child. And he's talking here at the beginning that in order for there to be a child, there needs to be 3 things. In order for there to be an actual being in the womb of a woman, there needs to be the woman is in season, that this mother and father have come together, and now there's a consciousness that is available to be actually coming into this particular being in this egg, essentially the egg and sperm coming together. And now we actually have a being, right? So here, when he says the union of mother and father, that's kind of like a nice way of saying like they're having sex, right? Like two individuals, a male and a female coming together, they're going to end up having to have this union. Then the mother needs to be in season, meaning there's an egg that is coming out of the ovaries down into the womb. And then that's where there's going to be a sperm that meets with that egg. And then there needs to be a consciousness that is actually able to come into that as well. And if those three things don't exist, then we don't have the starting of a human being. So this first one, he's talking about that there isn't those things, and that's why there's no conception, there's no embryo in the womb. In the second one, he's saying there is union of the mother and father, and the mother is in season, but there's no consciousness that comes into this particular mass. And what we might call this is like there can be a miscarriage, right? Like say that maybe someone's 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks along, maybe there hasn't been the consciousness that come into that particular embryo yet. It's not yet an embryo, that now maybe there's just kind of like a matter that comes out of the female that it wasn't actually solidified with the consciousness coming in, that it could have just been kind of like spit out of the body, so to speak. And we might refer to that as a miscarriage, even though there wasn't an actual consciousness yet. So it was just kind of like extra stuff, just matter that comes out. And then he talks about, okay, if all three of these things do exist, now we've got a living being, right? And he talks about the five aggregates as being able to determine if there is a living being, that there's physical form, that there's feelings, that there's perceptions, that there's volitional formations, which are choices and decisions, and then there's a consciousness. So all five of those things need to exist in order for there to be a living being. And if you look at the birth and what scientists share with us, that this can happen as early as 2 weeks and later as 6 weeks and beyond, that all these things of the five aggregates can occur. So even though, there's different political discussions around when is an embryo an actual living being and all these different things, the Buddha is actually talking about this from 2,500 years ago based on the wisdom that he had before science was even invented. But now that we're understanding science, what the Buddha actually taught 2,500 years ago is actually true, and we're confirming that with science. So it's really interesting how 2,500 years ago, he was able to understand this without all the modern technology that we have today. So once these three things are in place, that there's the union of the mother and father, that the mother is in season, meaning the egg is there, and then there's this consciousness, now we have this living being. And now the Buddha kind of goes through things that we learn growing up in school. But remember, the individuals who were studying with him, they didn't have that really structured educational system that we have today. That 2,500 years ago, you basically learn in your home. Your parents, your grandparents, your aunts and uncles were teaching you. And oftentimes, individuals were leaving out of the home to come learn with the Buddha, right? They were going into homelessness. They were essentially ordaining and leaving the home. So the Buddha, in some respects, became like an adopted father, where he was educating them about the world. And they didn't take science classes the way we would growing up in school in a structured educational system that we have now. So the Buddha is talking about this process of birth and how a woman carries the baby for 9 to 10 months here. And he's explaining all of this so that his students would understand it, because they wouldn't have necessarily had that education. No matter what age that they were learning with him, they might not have understood these things. So he's explaining the process of this being coming into existence. And then eventually he talks about this being growing up. He talks about the sense bases and how there's favoring and opposing. This is kind of the forming of central desire in the mind and how it gets acted upon as we're growing up, and how discontentedness truly comes to be, and how the mind is clinging and holding on. And ultimately he gets down to the ending part of dependent origination, and helping you to be able to see this more in like a story format, as opposed to just kind of like the pure teaching that you've seen in other parts of his discourses. So let me know what questions you guys have here. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom. It looks like Samantha has a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you. In relation to rebirth, and so like the top three things you had there, whether you have, the union of the mother and father, whether she's in season, and then whether there's a consciousness or a mind. In the past, we've learned that your rebirth is not instantaneous, that there can be, a long amount of time that passes, or it might be very soon after you pass from one realm to the other. What is the reason for the wait, I guess? Is there not an availability of appropriate body forms, whatever realm it might be? Or are there more beings that need to be, not beings, more consciousness and minds that need to be reborn than there are forms to go into?
I would suspect that's the case, Samantha, because both of those things can be true. I don't know 100% because the Buddha doesn't teach it, and I don't really have any insight into that in-between period very much, because it's not something that we can influence, and it isn't needed to be able to get to enlightenment, right? To eliminate your discontentedness. It's interesting to talk about these things, but it's not insight that we have or that I've seen that the Buddha teaches. But I suspect it is what you're describing.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome. Chris, you have a question? Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, so linking it back to the development of a being in the womb and dependent origination, is dependent origination then, is it saying that there needs to be a sufficient amount of craving that's accumulated of the being while in the womb and clinging to result in an existence that then results in birth? Or is it something else?
Your audio cut out there at the very beginning. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, sorry. While a being is developing in the womb, is dependent origination saying that there needs to be a sufficient accumulation or amount of craving and clinging to then result in existence for birth to take place for that being?
No, it's not. It's just saying that's craving and clinging actually exist inside the womb, that it's already present. And this is one of the causes and conditions that leads to the birth. So because there was craving and clinging in the previous life, the mind still had ignorance. And because of that ignorance, it led to this sequence of events that ultimately led to a birth in this life. But there doesn't need to be a certain building up of craving and clinging in the womb before there is birth. It's just already there at the time of conception when the mind is coming in to the egg and sperm. There's already craving and ignorance there in that particular mind. Otherwise, it wouldn't still be needing to be reborn.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. It looks like we have a question here from Mayu Lee on Facebook. She says, "Teacher, this mind was noticing when watching a movie in the event when an unwholesome characters are practicing unwholesome conduct towards wholesome characters. This mind sided with the wholesome characters and have slightly displeasing and discontentedness towards the unwholesome characters. I'm understanding it as the mind is having ill will and not having a genuine interest in seeing all beings be well without judgment, as well as this mind is having sensual desire. This is this correct, sir?" Yes, that's actually what's actually occurring. So in that situation, I think you already know, Mayuli, you would like to actually do that more, right? You would like to be exposing the mind to this, because if you're noticing that it's uncomfortable and having a bit of displeasing thoughts and discontentedness when you're watching movies where there's wholesome and unwholesome characters, do that regularly to be able to train the mind to just look at it as it's just contact. It's not, it doesn't need to be pleasing or displeasing or agreeable and disagreeable. It's just contact that's coming through the eyes and the ears when you're watching that movie, and you don't need to form any feelings based on it or any judgment towards those beings. So exposing your mind to those things will help you to be able to develop that, where you can just be at ease and completely peaceful and joyful and just watch it as content, not having any particular emotions or feelings because of it. And this is very different than what we're used to, right? In the unenlightened state, before we know these teachings, when we watch a movie, we're kind of used to getting emotional or, angry or frustrated or sad or something like this. And we actually consider that to be a really good movie. If an artist and a group of people can make a movie that elicits some kind of emotional response, we're like, wow, that was such a good movie. Or even like music, we do the same thing, or even visual art, right? Or graphic art. But what you'll be able to learn how to do is appreciate the movie for the acting and the storyline and the well-developed characters and, kind of the moral of the story and those kinds of things. You'll be able to appreciate that without the emotion. And that's what the mind needs to learn how to be able to do. And it can feel very foreign if we're used to watching movies and being emotional. It can feel kind of foreign to be able to watch it and not have that emotion. So there's kind of like a transition that the mind needs to go through where it goes from this, maybe, let's just say someone was heavily emotional watching movies. Now they get on the path to enlightenment, and there's kind of like this dullness of the mind as they're watching movies. And there's kind of like just a little bit of emotion one way or the other. But then if you keep on practicing, you'll get to this point where the mind brightens up and you'll be able to enjoy the movie for the costumes, the setting, the storyline, the well-developed characters, the artistry of the photography, and all these other things. You'll be able to appreciate that and enjoy it no matter what type of movie it is. So that would be something that you would like to continue to work towards by continuing to expose the mind to that kind of situation. Okay, I don't see any other questions anywhere. So let's go to this last chapter, and perhaps Pat would like to read this one. Go ahead, sir.
How is one developed in the womb? Then the Yaka in Dhaka, indigenous ethnic group from the Indian subcontinent, approached the perfect enlightened one and addressed him in verse. As the Buddhists say that form is not the soul, how then does one attain body? From where do one's bones and liver come? How is one developed in the womb? The perfectly enlightened one. First, there is the Kalala. From the Kalala comes the Abuddha. From the Abuddha, the Pesi is produced. From the Pesi, the Ghana arises. From the Ghana emerge the limbs, the head hair, body hair, and nails, and whatever food the mother eats. The meals and drink that she consumes. By this, the being there is maintained, the person inside the mother's womb. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pat. So here, the Buddha is giving his description of the process of a being growing inside the mother's womb. And of course, we use other words for these things now. We don't use these same words, but you can actually track down these words if you like. But essentially, our understanding of what's really occurring inside the womb is much deeper than what was understood at that time. But the Buddha had this particular wisdom that he had, and now we have a deeper wisdom based on the technology that we have available to us. So that's what we typically learn growing up and in our different classes of biology and things of this nature. But one of the things that you can see here is that the Buddha doesn't teach about a soul. There's other places in his teachings where he describes his undeclared teachings, and he doesn't declare whether there is or isn't a soul. And this is another place where you can see it too, where he doesn't describe that the body is an actual soul, because that conflicts with the universal truth of impermanence. It conflicts with the universal truth of non-self. So when we talk about rebirth, there isn't really anything being reborn. It's a completely new existence every single time. And it's helpful to be able to think of it that way. Even though we've been translating this word samsara to the cycle of rebirth for a very long time, it's better to think about it as the cycle of new existence, because the word the Buddha used is samsara. And then when he describes samsara, he talks about it as a new existence every single time. But somewhere along the lines, we started describing it as the cycle of rebirth. So I teach in the foundational programs and in the first book that it's better to think of it as the cycle of new existence, because oftentimes people talk about a soul. This is reincarnation. This isn't what the Buddha actually taught. That when people talk about reincarnation, they talk about a soul moving from body to body to body, and it's a different physical body, but it's essentially the same being. this isn't what the Buddha actually taught. But oftentimes people are attributing that to the teachings of the Buddha. And you can see here, and you can see other places that he didn't teach these kinds of things. So here, whether you decide to learn this level of what the Buddha is talking about or not is up to you. It's not something that absolutely needs to be needed, but to learn in order to get to enlightenment. But it does help to understand the process of birth, which we typically learn in school as we take different classes in school. So don't feel like you have to run out and try to figure out what all of these things are, because it's just helpful to know the process of birth and a being growing and developing in the womb. And that's what the Buddha is describing here. And your insight and ability to access resources that explains that is beyond what was being described during the lifetime of the Buddha. But this was probably beyond what anybody knew at the time. The Buddha was describing something well beyond what other people knew at the time, because they didn't have any insight into these kinds of things during their lifetime. So the Buddha was giving some insight into that. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere. So I'm just going to end class here by thanking all of you guys for joining. Thank you for reading. Thank you for your questions. I appreciate your interest in learning the teachings of the Buddha. Next week, we're going to be in the next 10 chapters. So if you'd like to read ahead, you can, which will be chapters 51 through 60. You can get the book online from our website, buddhadailywisdom.com. You can get it on Amazon. You can go print it yourself. You can get it here at the temple. You can be reading the book, and that'll help you to be more fully informed as we have these different classes. Tomorrow in our group learning program, I'm going to be teaching Volume 1, Chapter 2, which is titled Why Study Gautama Buddha's Teachings. This is a great program for people that are just getting started to be able to learn the foundational teachings. And since we just recently restarted this program, it's a great time for people to join either at 9 a.m. or 9 p.m. on Sunday. So if you'd like to be able to join that, you're more than welcome to, either through YouTube, Facebook, or Zoom. I'll be live streaming that, and it's also recorded. So if you miss the live classes, you can always watch the recordings either on YouTube or Facebook, or listening to it on our podcast. And then on Wednesday, I'm going to be doing the third part of a 4-part series that I'm doing on loving kindness meditation. So you're always welcome to attend that as well. So whatever you guys choose to do today, have a very wonderful and lovely rest of your day. We'll see you next time. Take care. Sawadee ka. Thank you again for watching. Enjoy your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.